I know this is super embarrassing, but can you give me a cowboy romance recommendation? This is so silly. I know this is so trashy, but I really liked this book. This is so trashy. This is so embarrassing, but I'm looking for a single dad romance recommendation. So embarrassing. So silly. I know this is so embarrassing. So silly. I'm so embarrassed by this. It's my guilty pleasure. Don't tell anybody, but I read this book and I loved it. Everyone has a very firm idea of what the average romance reader is like. We bet you already know her. She's rather dim and kind of tubby, undereducated, and undersexed, and she displays a distressing affinity for mom jeans and sweaters covered in puffy paint and appliqued kittens. Why do we treat romance books this way? Why are romance books so looked down on? Why do we treat them this way? Why do we dismiss them as silly and trashy and embarrassing? And what does that say about the way that society treats things that are embraced by women? I've seen a lot of discourse on TikTok lately about how books are either good or fun. I see women defending their reading choices by prefacing their book wrap-up videos or reviews with, I know this book isn't good, but I still really liked it and I had a lot of fun with it. And the books that they're usually holding up in those videos tend to be romance or romantasy. So why are we automatically discounting romance novels from being works of art or having literary merit? Why do we say that they can't have literary merit? Like, why are we doing that? Can a book not be fun and also extremely well written? Can a book not make you giggle, kick your feet, scream, and maybe have some good sex scenes, but also have some sort of literary merit? Is that not possible? Hello, wonderful world. My name is Elaine, and today I want to talk about why romance books are looked down on. What I want to do with this video is dive into this conversation. I want to look at why romance novels are so looked down on. Why are they not respected in scholarly literary communities? Why are they instantly discounted from winning major awards? What's going on here? Why do we shit on romance novels? That's basically the question that I want to talk about in this video. So I'm going to be looking at some articles, some scholarly sources, thinkers in the literary criticism realm, and just diving into this conversation. Before we can jump in to the romance novel conversation as a whole, though, we need to start out by looking at the way that society treats things that are typically embraced by women. Things that are embraced by women, that women enjoy, are often written off as embarrassing, silly, and worst of all, basic. So we're gonna look at some examples of this. So the first one I want to start with is actually the Beatles. Gonna refer to my notes here. So when the Beatles first came out, they were called, and I quote, the most repulsive group of men I've ever seen by a popular talk show host. Another quote we've got by a journalist named Paul Johnson. Those who flock around the Beatles are the least fortunate of their generation. The dull, the idols, the failures. Guess who flocked around the Beatles? Women. The Beatles had a fanatical following of devoted teen fans who gathered in larger numbers and with greater hysteria than anything ever seen. Women. So when the Beatles first came out, they were embraced by women. Their entire fan base was these crazy, screaming, loud group of teenage girls. And so immediately, if teenage girls like them, they can't make good music. They're silly, they're not good. So when the Beatles first came on the scene, you can find article after article about how they're bad and their music isn't good and it's not creative and their fan base is silly and they're gonna be a phase here and gone because the girls like them and the girlies are gonna move on to the next big thing, the next hot guy, and there was so much rhetoric about how they weren't good and they weren't gonna be long lasting. Look at them now. Guess what happened? White men got a hold of them and were like, oh, wait a second, like, maybe they're actually pretty good, and now think about all of the men that you know that love the Beatles. Women still love them too, but it's just funny how when they first came out, because women were like, they're good, they're instantly written off. But now we see that that wasn't the case. Look at them now. And so another good example of this is actually Taylor Swift. Specifically Taylor Swift's Reputation Stadium Tour. I'm sure a lot of the Swifties out there know this, but when Taylor first announced her Reputation Stadium Tour, immediately the media was like, that is hilarious, that's going to be a failure. So I'm gonna read you a headline from an article. Taylor Swift's Rep Tour is a flop. Half-filled stadiums, thousands of unsold seats, 0 sellouts. So that was written by Digital Music News, and her tour was widely thought to be a failure. Guess who her fan base is? Women. So I just read you that article headline. In reality, the tour was 100% sold out with an attendance of 2.9 million. At the time, it was the second highest grossing female tour and the highest grossing North American tour by a female 2 months before it even ended. By the end of the tour, it was the highest grossing North American tour of all time, grossing $260 million over 38 shows. Suck on that, media journalist meanie dudes. All right, another example is the Barbie movie. The Barbie movie made over $1 billion globally, but it didn't win any Oscars, except for Billie Eilish for What Was I Made For. But for the movie itself, not a single Oscar. And then movies in general, if you do a Google search of greatest movies of all time, pretty much all of them that show up are dude flicks. The movies that come up are films with male leads, male directors, male writers, written with a male voice, probably for a male gaze, male audience. So you've got movies like The Godfather, Shawshank Redemption, Forrest Gump, Interstellar. Those kinds of movies pop up when you Google greatest movies of all time, and all of those that I just named have male leads, and I'm pretty sure they all have male directors as well. Where are the films with the female leads, the female directors, the female audience, the female voice? Looking back at the Beatles, Taylor Swift, Barbie, movies in general, we can see that things that are embraced by women have been dismissed by our society quickly and swiftly. But what I think all of these examples also show is that they're often wrong. The Beatles did stick around. Taylor Swift did have the highest grossing tour of all time. So I just wanted to point that out before we dive into romance novels particularly. And the main question from that is, why does something have to appeal to men for it to be taken seriously? So I found this interesting study by a scholar named Nicola Griffith. They did a study on major book awards, like the most prestigious book awards, and how many of them were won by women or written about women. So from 2000 to 2015, 8 Pulitzer Prizes were by men about boys, 3 were by women about boys, 3 were by women about both boys and girls, and 0 were by women about women, and 0 were by men about girls. I just spat a lot of things at you. Basically what I'm saying is that there were no prize-winning books about women. All of the winners for these Pulitzer Prizes, each book was focusing on a male voice, male perspective. So here's a quote from Griffith. When it comes to literary prizes, the more prestigious, influential, and financially remunerative the award, the less likely the winner is to write about grown women. So basically what they're saying, if you want to win a Pulitzer, you better write about men. So women's voices are not being heard or awarded, especially in literature. Even looking at more recent winners, this trend continues. I think there might be like 1 Pulitzer Prize book that's about women within the past few years, but I looked at the list and it seemed to be the same trend continuing. And then if you look closer at romance, this genre is just completely ignored. It's hardly recognized. Romance books as a whole are not being awarded, they're not being praised, and we're still writing them off as embarrassing. They're still fighting for respect in the literary community. So that brings me to an article I found from Smithsonian Magazine. Basically, back in the 1970s, there was a scholar who said that romance books were actually not empowering and harmful to women, and she wrote about that, and it kind of took wind and has continued to exist within this literary criticism realm. Her name was Germaine Greer. She started popular criticism of the romance novel. She actually called them an enslaver of women, which is like big words. That's a big statement. I found a person, her name is France Lyons. She said, "We've been talking about this for 30 years, since the 1980s at least. It's been about empowerment versus oppression. Is this narrative empowering or oppressive to women? We need new approaches to romance fiction." She said it's the same argument 250 years later, looking at the 18th century reaction to popular fiction for women. So looking at the way people in the 18th century responded to romance and literary fiction for women, we are having the same response now in 2025. So to kind of combat this, in 2007, she actually started the International Association for the Study of Popular Romance. Sounds very cool. And because of people like her, we're starting to slowly see this integration of romance with other disciplines. It's actually cool to see some of the things that people are doing. You know, there's studies of doctor and nurse portrayal in romance novels. There's been studies on disability and romance in vampire fiction. We're slowly starting to see some things change, and we're seeing some cool integrations of these different disciplines, and people are maybe starting to see that romance is like, it's like a fine thing to like and enjoy and want to study. And so literary scholars just need to come to terms with this. Literary scholars and the world just needs to come to terms with the fact that romance books are extremely popular and they're present and they're here to stay. Something else that is kind of problematic is that we as a society tend to stereotype romance readers. That's why a lot of, I think, literary scholars and just like book readers in general, we've got this stereotype of what a romance reader looks like. And because of that, we write them off as not being serious. Like, they're not reading to analyze books and learn deeper meanings. They're just reading to like get off. And that stereotype is extremely harmful. I found this article called theconversation.com, and they wrote that a lot of people view romance novels as sentimental junk food for the brain that's harmful to readers by giving them unrealistic expectations. And that's where this quote from Smart Bitches Trashy Books come from. They wrote, "Everyone has a very firm idea of what the average romance reader is like. We bet you already know her. She's rather dim and kind of tubby, undereducated, and undersexed, and she displays a distressing affinity for mom jeans and sweaters covered in puffy paint and applique kittens." If that is what society thinks romance readers are, society's saying women are not reading to learn or expand their minds or have like actual opinions and criticize the way that things are written, like that is an extremely harmful narrative to say that, oh, romance readers are just trying to get off. Romance readers are just trying to have a fun time. Like, they're not serious, so anything they say should not be taken seriously. Like, it's a slippery slope, you know? There's an assumption that romance readers read books uncritically, but if you just hop on Goodreads, you will see this to be untrue. I have seen lots of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-star reviews for romance books, and people have valid criticisms of the way that they're written and the way that they portray relationships and different tropes. Like you'll just see that it's not true that romance readers aren't criticizing and critically thinking about the books that they're reading. Romance books have a diverse audience with diverse opinions. Why do you think it's such a big genre? You've got the whole spectrum of readers and what they're interested in. The Smithsonian article actually said that women write and read romance heroes to examine, dissect, subvert, discuss, revel in, and reject patriarchal constructions of masculinity. So I find that quote really interesting because basically it's saying that women are reading these books to play around with ideas of masculinity and femininity and gender roles, and we can like deconstruct them and make them whatever we want to be in our romance book. It's a cool way to play around with society. I mean, even if you read 18th century romance, it's still playing around with the ideas of masculinity and the constructs of the patriarchy and how women can find power in romance and love. And so I think to stereotype an entire audience and to try to dictate how all of us must read is just crazy. And to take it a step further, not all romance readers are women. In fact, in a study by Southern New Hampshire University, a 2017 study showed that around 18% of romance readers are actually men. They surveyed around 2,000 romance readers and 18% of those were men. So I think that that's an important thing to recognize too. It's not just women enjoying the romance novels. We could take it a step further to say that romance is something that can connect us. Love is something that every human being should be capable of understanding. And because of that, romance is actually really powerful and has the ability to shape change and create change. Romance, in fact, has actually helped to create social change by engaging in conversations surrounding topics such as gender and race and sexuality, equality, consent. And these are all topics that are brought up in romance novels, and romance novels are actually every day becoming more and more diverse, and the representation in them is kind of beautiful. And because romance is so fun and engaging and accessible, we can present these complex relationships with characters from different backgrounds than ourselves, and we can all relate to them because guess what? They're falling in love. And that's something that a lot of people can relate to. And so if you see someone who's totally unlike you, maybe different race, different gender, different sexuality, different religion, ethnicity, whatever it is, if you watch them fall in love, like it's a great way to connect and be like, oh wow, like we're all, at the end of the day, we have some things in common and some things that are not in common, and it's a great way to learn. One of my favorite romance novels, the main character has a disability and she has chronic pain, and that's something that I've never experienced myself, and I had never met anybody personally that has chronic pain. And so by reading that novel, I was introduced to this whole new concept And I learned so much about how to be more inclusive when I go about my day. So at the time that I read that book, I was in college and I was planning events for our college campus. And in the book, the main character, she talks about how she has to make sure that an event is going to have chairs before she can go because she has to be able to sit down. And so reading her talk about all these small things that maybe may seem obvious when I say it out loud, I, as this college student event planner, was like, oh my gosh, we need to make sure that there's multiple seating options, and we need to make sure that there's this, and this, because there could be students out there living with a disability or chronic pain, and I want to make sure that they can enjoy the event too. So that's just a personal example of how a romance novel opened my brain and introduced me to a whole new thing and allowed me to become a more inclusive person, at least I think. Yeah, romance novels are responsible for creating like change. We need to give that some merit. And so despite this, despite their ability to create change, despite their ability to connect people, despite their wide audience, romance books are still not taken seriously. Romance books are still largely being left out of the conversation. In fact, The Times, this UK news platform, they released an article called The 33 Best Books of 2021. And they made sure to put in a little tagline like, of all genres, right? That's what was left off. Romance. It was just baffling to me when I came across that. They had gardening, art, self-help, pop rock, children, all kinds of genres, but no romance. And so when I came across that, it was just baffling to me. There's not a single romance book you would put in the 33 best books of 2021 across all genres. What? And so now let's talk about money. Romance books generate about $1.44 billion a year. It is the highest grossing book genre there is, nearly double than the one underneath of it, which is crime fiction and mystery. In 2022, there was a 52.4% increase in romance book sales. Basically what I'm saying is numbers talk, money talks, so romance novels are a $1 billion industry. And then going even a little bit further, women make up 80% of fiction sales. Women are also, just like random, women are also more likely to be library members. They're more likely to start book clubs. They're more likely to write fiction. They're more likely to teach children how to read. So basically what I'm saying is women dominate the book and the reading industry. And yet their voices are still not being heard and their narratives are still being left out. So what's going on here? And it's funny because romance novels make so much more money than the next genre, which is what I mentioned, crime fiction and mystery, and those aren't treated the same way as romance. You can talk about those. Those aren't taboo. Those aren't embarrassing. So think about their audiences. Think about romance versus crime fiction / mystery. Which one has more women readers? Which do you think? And which is being taken more seriously? A lot of the criticism of romance novels is that they're trope heavy and they're formulaic. But the crime fiction mysteries aren't? Okay, so why this treatment of romance books? I'd like to say that it's sexism with a dash of elitism, but love is the one thing that connects us all. Think of Romeo and Juliet, Bonnie and Clyde, Gatsby and Daisy, Mickey and Minnie, Cinderella and Prince Charming. I could go on and on. And did you know all of those characters that I just named? Did you know all those famous couples? Probably, because romance is ever present. Romance is everywhere. And romance isn't going anywhere. And love is powerful. Storytelling is powerful. Books are hard to write, and we need to give these authors their flowers. It's long overdue. So why do we as women call these books trashy and silly and embarrassing? Why do we write them off and make them seem so much smaller than what they are? Why should we feel guilty about a pleasure? Why should we feel embarrassed about something that we love to read? I mean, yeah, there are some embarrassing romance books out there, I will say. Like, you know, if you go deep down the wormhole, you can find some weird stuff. But guess what? Who cares? To each their own, you know? We shouldn't have to defend what we read. We shouldn't have to fight for space to get the things that we love to be taken seriously. Books can be good and fun. And yeah, I know there's some horribly written romance books out there. Guess what? There's horribly written books of every genre that are weird, okay? But what I'm trying to say is that books can make you giggle and kick your feet and scream and slide down a wall. And they can also be extremely well written with complex characters and interesting family dynamics and lessons about communication and being in a relationship. These books can have diverse main characters that open your mind up to a whole whole new identity or something you never even knew existed. And so I think we should stop trying so hard to defend what we enjoy. I don't want to write off what I'm reading as trashy or silly or little or embarrassing. And while all romance novels are not 5 stars, that's not what I'm saying. Every romance novel still deserves to be critically read and looked at with a lens of like, oh, maybe this is weird representation and this isn't okay, because we still need to be able to call out books when they're problematic and books when they're wrong and books when they're poorly written. But we shouldn't discredit all romance books simply because they're romance books. There are some stars out there. And guess what? My interests and what I'm reading is not silly. It's not embarrassing. I'm a girl who loves romance. I love hockey romance. I love to read books where the guy falls first. I love enemies to lovers. I love friends to lovers. I love to write romance. I just love it. And it brings me so much joy and happiness, and it lets me escape hard things for a little bit and just feel happy. And you know what? Sure, maybe most of them have happy endings and I know that that's how it's gonna end, but it is so fun enjoying the ride. And just because romance books are targeted at women doesn't mean that they don't deserve to be taken seriously. My opinion as a female reader, the female voice deserves to be heard. So read what you want and look out, world, because romance books are here to stay.